And a big welcome to everybody.
Yes,
Glad you
indeed.
made it tonight.
So, welcome to Shipwrecks of Curtis Bay. We are very excited to have Susan Langley here, and Hillary will introduce her in just a few minutes. But first, I'll do a few little announcements. I'm President Captain Cheryl Duval, and I put in the chat already, so please enter your name and your town, state, country, or body of water. We like to know where you're calling in from. Sometimes people have Starlink and they're calling in from the Atlantic Ocean. So we welcome you all. And we'll have our speaker just start presenting in a few minutes, and then we'll be taking questions from attendees and begin the wrap up around 8:15. All right, next slide, our Board of Officers. I just want to make sure that everyone knows who your CAPCA board are. I'm president. We have our Vice President Davis Jones and Greg Pabst. I'm not sure if either of them are on. We do have Bob Thompson on as our secretary. We also have Carl Bart is our treasurer, and he actually hails now from Texas. So we're very spread out all over the place. Our past president, Tony Tomasello. And then board of directors, Will Fink, Kevin Wickar, who I know is on. Kevin is our has just joined the board as our continuing education director. We also have Laura Olson, Philip Gauthier. Phil is our membership director. Laura is our jobs program. So for those of you who are our members, if you see all those postings about what jobs are available to our members in terms of instruction or deliveries or um, charter captains, whatever, they come through Laura as jobs program director. And of course, Hillary, who will be addressing you in just a few minutes as our program director. Dave Sire is right now in Alaska, I believe. I don't know if he's calling in, but he's on a great vacation. We'll allow him as webmaster to take a little brief break. And then members at large, we have Rob Doolittle, Chuck Thompson, and Priscilla. And Priscilla is also our assistant webmaster, and she's hosting the Zoom tonight. So thank you very much for all of that. I did want to also say that our we do have Budget and Finance Committee, and we did meet last month. We're meeting again next week, and we want to report that CAPCA is operating within the budget approved by the members at the annual business meeting at the end of last year. In addition to those board of directors, we couldn't do it without all of the assistants and the committees that we have. And we wanted to thank some recent volunteers. As I mentioned, Kevin Wickar is new to our board, but also Chuck Thompson is our new member at large. So thanks to both of them for joining the board. We had a few people at the Career Expo on April 30th, which was a few days after our last program last month. So Joe Ruzzi, Kevin Wickar, and Rob joined me for that. And it was a bunch of high school students from Anne Arundel County. It was awesome. And thank Bill Washington for coaching me and encouraging me to do that Career Expo again because he had done it many years in the past. We had not done it since pre-pandemic. So that was fun to be back doing that. We also have Joe Ruzzi, who might be on by now. He is a new member of our marketing committee, and Don Snellgrove has joined as a membership committee member. But we do need more volunteers. So if any of these appeal to you, Speakers Bureau coordinator, newsletter assistant to help Priscilla, because Priscilla does put out our monthly newsletter, does a great job at that. She's been doing it for 10 years and she's looking for some assistance. So we would love to help her with that. Laura, I mentioned earlier for our jobs program, she's looking for an assistant. And we also still have several openings for our marketing committee. And if you have any marketing expertise, we would very much like to hear from you. We did welcome 33 new members in the past 6 months. And I think I caught one joined today, one joined yesterday that you see there at the top of the list. And I think I caught the others because Dave Sire, who's vacationing, is usually the one to put them already up on the website. But I was hoping to make sure we had current current listing here. So thank you very much to our new members for joining. And we have now more than 365 members of CAPCA, which is awesome. We did also want to thank our speakers and booth volunteers from the 2 boat shows that occurred in April. We have a long list here of booth volunteers and an equally long list of speakers. So just would like to thank everyone for understanding how important it is for us to have representation at the boat shows, both in terms of being in the booth to answer questions for people, both licensed captains and people who just are curious about what it means to hire a captain if they're a boat owner and need help, and also the speakers that were able to share their expertise at our various free seminars that happened during the boat shows. And with that, I will turn it over to Hillary, who's also going to make an announcement as to what today is. Today is a special day. Okay.
So today we have the International Women Mariners Day. You know, we're talking about women mariners, and of course we have one with us as our speaker today. So at the end, I'd like to have all the women stick around because we'd like to get one of those Zoom pictures that we used to do during the COVID. If we can get all the just women on the screen at the end of this event, then I'll do a print screen and get you all as a group. So I'd like to look forward to that. We've got more programs coming up, of course. We're going to be at the Elks Lodge again in June. So that is a hybrid meeting, and we're going to have how they coordinate services between the Maryland DNR, the Coast Guard, local fireboat captains. Do you want to say anything about that? I guess we have time. I won't put you on the spot, Bob. That's okay.
Or nothing to add.
Here we go. He is going to talk about it. Okay. Maybe not. So the next one we have noted is another live meeting that's going to be about nonprofits, the work we can do for nonprofits. And it's ways that captains can volunteer their services for all these on the water. Between the two, we've got a couple of Zoom meetings. They aren't ready to be announced yet, but we'll be having them. So definitely hang in there with us. So I'd like to welcome tonight's speaker. And I guess you can all applaud using your ways to do that on screen there. Susan Langley, our PhD, she directed the Maryland Maritime Archaeology Program for over 30 years, retiring in August 2025. She served as both the state underwater archaeologist and the dive safety officer. In this capacity, she also worked with the Area Contingency Planning Committee, organized by the U.S. Coast Guard, to address oil and hazmat spills that might be directly or indirectly impact submerged historic resources. She also taught at numerous public and private colleges and universities, and is an adjunct professor at St. Mary's College, and we know they've got a great program down there. She instructed an introduction to underwater archaeology, the anthropology of pirates and piracy, a popular pastime here, as well as fiber, textiles, and a trade course. So Dr. Langley taught maritime archaeology in Thailand for several years for UNESCO. She's a master scuba dive instructor, an emergency first responder instructor, and lectures and leads expeditions for Abercrombie and Kent. And then as a beekeeper, she kept a hive at Government House for 10 years through two governors and is a founding member of the Society for the Preservation of Old Mills Mid-Atlantic chapter. So I'm going to stop my sharing and welcome her here
Thank
to
you.
allow her to do her own share. How about that?
Right, let's do that.
See her slides.
Okay, let me get this up.
Thank you very much for being here.
Oh, my pleasure. Let me get this going. So there we go. Are we good? Can we all see that?
Yep.
All right. Um, I'm going to focus on the vessels that, because this is what brought me into the area, other than my job is to know where all the wrecks are anyway, or was, is I'm looking at the U.S. Shipping Board Emergency Fleet Corporation World War I fleet. And that was the focus. And there are numerous of these in the area. But of course, while you're doing it, you find all these other delightful tidbits and amazing little stories, some of which I think are apocryphal and some of which are legitimate. So I'm going to run through some of those as we go along. And most of it you probably all know, but that's all right. Feel free to share. I can't see the chat, but if you want to throw things in there, we'll try and copy it before I leave or whatever. And I put my email here and I'll put it again at the end. So if something occurs to you at 3 a.m., you can send me a note. I'll get back to you sooner or later, probably sooner. But so we'll start with these vessels, and the one you're seeing, I'm using three main sources. Robert Burgess, who was a maritime historian in the 50s, mostly 50s, 60s, he went around photographing resources that he felt were going to be lost. And he gave a lot of his data to what was the Maryland Historical Society. Now it's the Center for History and Culture, I think. I get it wrong all the time. And several of the museums, Mariners, Chesapeake Bay, Maritime Museum, and whatnot. He had two volumes out, one called This Was Chesapeake Bay, 1963, and Chesapeake Circle, Volume 1. There never was a Volume 2, I finally found out, from 1965. And the other was by Bob Keith. If you knew Robert Keith, he was a prominent journalist. And he was on the Maryland Historical Society's Maritime Committee with me. It's where I knew him. We lost him in 2010, but he put out a book called Baltimore Harbor, A Picture History in 1982. And a lot of these earlier photos are from that. But I did go out. This is what we're looking at here is the stern of one of these vessels called the Dover. And we'll talk more about it in a minute, but that was one of Burgess's. This is one I took of the Dover in 2018. So let's look at where the majority of these are. Hillary and I went back and forth. I kept changing the title and she'd change it to match. And I'd say, oh, wait, I should match the old. So anyway, we know we're in the creek, but we're also in the bay. So we're going to drop down here. I think you can see my cursor. We've got Hawkins Point. So we've got Curtis Bay, Curtis Creek, and we're using both of these. Little zoom in there. And most of you will know where these are. We're going to look at three clusters of wrecks. And we'll start here in Walnut Cove. So here's the Beltway. And you see it does lift, honest. This is the railway bridge that stays open all the time because it's defunct. But we'll do this first, then we'll come up here, then we'll go down to the other pool of wrecks. So this is a little drawing that Bob had in his book, and it's good because he identified as many of the vessels as he could. And so we have here in Walnut Cove, the Dover, the Ashland, and the Fort Scott. Those are the shipping board vessels that I was first interested in. There's the Catherine, oh gosh, I shouldn't play with that. Back up, there we go. The Catherine May, the William T. Parker, the Stephen Chase, the Zora and Anna is one vessel. The Carey, the Southern, and the Runner are two ocean-going tugs just in that cluster. So we'll look at those. Here's a Google shot of it. And this is now known as Jaws Marine. I think most of you may know that. Lovely people. Very, very supportive of all this stuff. And the vessels are, I'll mention one of them now. The Carey is actually buried under this parking lot. The others, you can still see vestiges of them. This is a concrete vessel. This is the Dover. This is the Ashland. This is its stern. So they are bow, stern, stern, bow, and the Fort Scott. This is a barge. This was known as the Gambler's Yacht. One of the tugs is in here. One of these is a tug, and I think the Stephen Chase may have been moved. It was out here, brought into here. I don't think it's there now. I think it's been moved again. This is the Catherine May in there. So we'll look at some of these and a little bit about their stories. So here's how he identified it, and he's tried to find some landmarks in the background. And you'll notice that A. Smith and Sons Ship Repair became Smith and Sons Shipyard, became Smith Shipyard. And it started in 1918, and it built one of the vessels that is not one of the ones that's in here, unfortunately, but a lot of the vessels that are here because the Smith Shipyard looked at them, couldn't fix them, and put them over here, sort of spare parts, if you will. You can cannibalize them. The larger vessels were actually left there by Davison Chemical, which in 1954 became W.R. Grace. So they're the same chemical company, but they changed a little earlier than I thought. But the Davison Chemical plant started in 1832, family operated, so long before there were environmental safeguards, which has a bearing on some of these. So, and again, our concrete vessel and some of the other little ones that we'll talk about later. So just to give an outline of that. The vessels, the Dover was built in 1919. Well, and I'll talk about the whole fleet in a bit. They were going to build 1,000 ships in 18 months, starting in 1917 for the war effort. And I'll talk more about the Mallows Bay vessels because these were the ones that when they sold the fleet off, these ones went to private sector. So I'll talk about these vessels first. So again, it was completed as a barge. So the vessels were canceled because the war ended. Never a bad thing to happen, but it ended, so they never did finish building the vessels. They wanted 1,000. They said they were going to build 731. They built fewer than 300 were completed. Some of them were half completed. It was more like 134 were completed. 263 were half finished. 98 had been delivered. 76 had carried cargo, but never to the war theaters. They'd never gone overseas. So, and we'll talk about all the problems and flaws and issues they had with them. But the Dover was built in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. It was originally Hull 402 and was built by L.H. Shattuck Company, if you know shipyards. The Ashland, I couldn't find a year's hard and fast for it, but it was in with a number of other vessels built in 1918. So that's probably correct. Again, it was completed as a barge, so it was more than half done, and they decided to finish it. At least it had a name. Most of them just went by hull number or got canceled. It was built in Stonington, Connecticut by Ship Construction and Trading Company. And the Fort Scott was built in 1919 in Portland, Oregon, and then was sold off in 1922 right to the Davison Chemical Company at that point. It was built by Grant Smith and Porter Company. So when the war ended, they had all these vessels in various states of build. First thing they did was try and sell them to the private sector. And around 1919 to 1920, 21, Davison Chemical bought at least 4, probably more, because there's a few listed as abandoned in Baltimore, but didn't say where. And they were using them to bring pyrite ore to get copper from Cienfuegos, Cuba, up to their factory in Baltimore. But it was very brief. By 1923, they just said it wasn't cost effective, and they just left them there. Now, there were other reasons. I mean, I would have thought ore would be the easiest to transport. It's not going to spoil. You can fill a ship easily. But these vessels did not handle well in rough weather. They were pretty slow, although that doesn't really be an issue except for business, but it's not like the ore would go bad. But we'll talk about some of the other issues with them. And the upshot was they weren't going to use them anymore. And so what is the Mallows Bay fleet, as I call it? Where did they come from? As I said, 1917, they were going to build 1,000 of these vessels. It was going to be a wooden bridge to Europe. They are not military navy in any way. These were completely merchant marine. And in fact, a lot of people talk about it as, oh, this big boondoggle. One of the benefits to these was that although we've always had American merchant mariners, they weren't really formally organized. Well, if you're planning to build 1,000 ships, you need all your personnel trained to the same standards to operate them. And that led to the formalization of the American merchant marine. So that was one big plus of this operation. And there was a number of these posters, they're absolutely gorgeous. The big launch on July 4th of 1918, sadly, only 24 vessels were launched, but the posters were already made. So they're going to lie and we're going to swear to it and just go along. This is a map that was produced for one of our reports that shows how many shipyards were represented by vessels that were in Mallows Bay as of the 11th of April, 1929. That's when the company that ended up buying the fleet, because what happened was at the end of the war, they tried to sell them privately. They didn't have a lot of luck with that. So they put them up as a lot sale. And they ended up getting they had to do it 3 times before they got a taker. And 2 California lawyers called themselves Western Marine and Salvage, bought the fleet for $750,000. That's the cost of building one vessel. And they started to salvage them between Alexandria, Virginia, and around the Mallows Bay area, ultimately moving into Mallows Bay. But I'll just leave it because we're not talking about that at the moment. But they went out of business during the Depression, and the local residents took over and were salvaging. So in addition to the vessels that were there in 29, more were taken out. And then in World War II, Bethlehem Steel came down, dug out a burning basin in the back, and burned another dozen, and then said, okay, this isn't cost effective. So they quit doing it, and the rest of the vessels stayed there at that point. Now, so here's where we are on the Potomac, about 30 miles south of DC. Here's Mallows Bay. This is that burning basin that Beth Steel dug out. This is Quantico. The Marine Corps did build one of these vessels, and it is in, actually, we'll look at it. It's the Portland, and that's in our second cluster of vessels. So, as I say, it's become now it's a National Marine Sanctuary. We have about 80 vessels in the bay proper, and we have another 28 maybe scattered throughout the 18 square miles, which is around this area of the sanctuary proper. This is from the Washington Star, February 2nd. Sorry, I've got the bars up at the top. There we go. February 2nd, 1946. And so this is winter, obviously, that's ice. These vessels are between 65, 75, a few are a bit longer, feet long. So you get an idea of the size. The scale is really hard to picture when there's that many of them. The one in the color was taken by Don Chomet, who wrote a book called The Ghost Fleet of Mallows Bay and Other Tales of the Lost Chesapeake. And about a third of the book is about Mallows. This was taken in the late 80s, early 90s. We don't see the ships exposed that much with that much vegetation anymore. Partly it's them degrading, partly it's sea level rise, but there's only a couple that seem to sprout vegetation now. Now, why am I not getting my... Oh, come on, don't do that. Just move on. There we go. This is one of the vessels being launched, and this is at the Smith Yard in Baltimore. And it only built 1 or 2, but this was from the Smith shipyard, and launching the vessels in 1918. And it had its 100th anniversary in 2018 as well. Come on, there we go. So this is one of the vessels that were taken, it was taken by Burgess, and you can see all the different vessels here, and this is taken about 1954, so they're in better shape. And as I said, there were a number of problems with them. There were some design flaws. Some of it was faulty construction. A lot of those shipyards, people only had 2 weeks of training to get out there and start trying to follow the plans they were sent. Some shipyards didn't follow the plans, for better or worse. There was poor caulking. The rudders couldn't handle the strain because they weren't put in properly. So people were saying, if you have a keg of nails and a hammer, you can get government money. So some of the shipyards were a bit iffy. The green timber used caused a lot of leaks. And one captain said, they sent out oak shoots in April and provided pine cones for the Christmas mess. They were so green. The engines varied. There were 2 boilers. There were triple expansion. They had a real mixed bag. And some of these vibrated so hard, caused leaks. So we find big lumps of concrete that were put in the bow and stern. And some of the frames were concrete, trying to control the vibration. It's really interesting. East Carolina University has been partnering for several years. And we have had 2 masters and a doctorate come out so far. Three masters and a doctorate, and we have another doctorate for Texas A&M from a different vessel. It wasn't related to these, but so they're finding all kinds of information for us as well. Now, that said, the other bonus to having this boondoggle, aside from formalizing the merchant marine, by having so many shipyards set up all over the country, it provided the infrastructure after the war that rocketed America to the forefront of shipbuilding for the 20th century. So there's two big pluses right there that came out of this. So again, the vessels that we are going to be looking at down here in the front, this is the Zora and Anna. William T. Parker's right in front of this concrete vessel. Some of these other vessels have been removed, like this is one of these World War I ones, but it's not there now, barely a walkway. And there's a couple of others in here that are a little bit harder to see. I don't think the Stephen Chase, maybe it's there, it's hard to tell. But most of the vessels that were there are still there. There's the Catherine May there. So here we are looking at the Dover. This is 54, this was 82. And then mine, as I showed you earlier, from 2018. Some of the other vessels, just because we're in the neighborhood and I've mentioned them, the Stephen Chase, beautiful ship in the foreground here, was built in Dorchester in 1876. That photo was 1933. This one's 34. And these are, obviously, it's still sailing. It's about 66.5 feet long, 23.9 feet wide. It was abandoned around 47. 47 was official, but we think it may have been abandoned a couple years before that. It was an extremely fast sailor, but the owners sort of just disappeared, like they didn't want to be responsible for it. So it was over two vessels, because there's the Dover, then there's the Ashland, then there's the Catherine May, and it was over there. Then it was brought around by the Dover, and I think it's been moved again because I have not seen. I'd have to dive it. There's not enough showing even from the air to know that it's still there. I'm a little suspicious of that. The Catherine May that I mentioned, obviously it's not the foreground, that's William Pell, but you can see its masts in the distance. And this is one of those lovely Bodine photos. They're hard to mistake, taken in the 30s, of course, of the Catherine May in Baltimore. It was built in 1919, so it's contemporary with the Mallows vessels, or the emergency fleet vessels. It was built in East Hampton, Maine. Little too late to profit from carrying World War I freight. In 21, it carried coal from Norfolk to Lisbon. And then it kind of disappears from the record. It tootles around Europe a little bit. It makes it to Bermuda, and it's actually registered out of Halifax, Nova Scotia, and Hamilton, Bermuda, or was. And it was stuck there in 1929 when the Depression hit. So the people who bought it managed to get a cargo of scrap iron to get it up to Baltimore. And then they had no return cargo. By 1934, there was a proposal to fix it up and take it to South America by a group of businessmen. But once it was assessed and surveyed, that was going to be too expensive, and they dropped that plan. So in 1935, there were caretakers living on it, but they moved off, and it was at Woodall's Yard. And if you know where that is, it's at Locust Point. It's sort of at the foot of Woodall Street, right between General Ship Repair and Domino Sugar. So I'm sure most of you know where that is. And it settled actually to the bottom there, and the U.S. Marshal took it for docking costs and sold it for $405. The guy who bought it figured he could make a profit. It's time's a ticking, and he had it towed to Curtis Bay and was sitting on it. He was offered $10,000 for it in 1941. The U.S. obviously wasn't in the war yet, but they could sort of see it coming, felt they could profit. But he got greedy, and he said he won $20,000 and didn't get an offer. And unfortunately, the person who offered him the $10,000, and it gets a bit suspicious here, was murdered that night in his hotel room in Baltimore, the night he made the offer, and the money was stolen. So somebody else was obviously listening, while he was making this offer. So it ended up not going anywhere. It stayed there in Curtis Creek. It got moved around hither and yon, but ended up parked beside the ashland, and you can see the stern. You can still see it's registered Bermuda there, and that the front is very distinctive because you can see the that sort of panel around the hawse hole, and that's still very evident even today. You can notice it. These are two photos. One on the left was taken by Bob Keith, and in 82, I think it was, and he said he said, well, here's it's not the one on the left, it's on the right. I know it's hard to tell, but there are two vessels there, and the black and white one. And he said, well, here's the Catherine May turning back into a tree. And the one on the right is the colored photo is one I took in 2018. So she definitely is turning back into a tree. The most prominent part is the bow, and if you can get behind the stern still. So it does lend itself to paddling. This one is it's got a great story. Problem is I don't know if it's true. This is the William T. Parker, built in 1891 in Milton, Delaware, at the C.C. Davidson Yard. 105 feet long, three-masted schooner, little on the small side for coastwise cargo routes. Had a lot of bad luck. It seemed to ground a lot. And finally, what happened in 1915, its crew abandoned it in a storm off North Carolina, and because they felt it was going to sink that time for sure. And the story goes that it sailed unmanned all the way to Maine and back. Now, that would mean it would have to ride the Gulf Stream north and take the longshore current back. But how do we know that? Bob Keith references it, but he cites Burgess rather. Burgess mentions it, but he doesn't cite a source. And if nobody, all I can think is somebody up in Maine had to have seen it, somebody offshore, and reported that they saw it, and either they didn't communicate with it or they didn't get a response. But I've been trying to track old newspapers and things, and I have not found that story. But the story is that as it came back south, it was corralled off the Chesapeake, brought into Baltimore, and fixed up, and sailed and registered in Baltimore and started sailing in 1919. Took the top masts off of it in 1929, and the keel is starting to hog a bit, but it's still carrying lumber to North Carolina and Virginia and Baltimore, running back and forth. 1935, it got hit by a steamer off Bloody Point and managed to get back to Baltimore. And then it took it to Smith's Yard, and Smith's Shipyard said they didn't think they could fix it. And they took it to Locust Point. Everything sat at Locust Point for a bit. And while it was there, people lived on it. It was dismasted. It was used as a carpentry shop for several years. And then in 1945 was moved to Curtis Creek. And people were living on it until the 50s when it started to rot out from under them. And they finally were told they had to leave. So this is it from back in the 65. This is the one in the lower left here was one of Bob's from 82. And all I could find when I was there on the lower right is the centerboard trunk. Now I expect there are some frames and whatnot if I got in the water, but that's all that's left of it. So it's this great sort of Marie Celeste story, but can't be substantiated. So I really shouldn't be perpetuating it, but it's too cool not to tell you. But at least I'll give you the caveat. And if anyone runs across, a source for that story, I'd be very happy to hear about it. So we'll go back here. As I said, I mentioned these other two little vessels, the Carey, which is now under a parking lot. It was built in 1882. It was a centerboard schooner. It was about 93 feet long, 23 feet wide. The Zora and Anna, it was the oldest in this cluster of vessels. 1855, it was originally the Ocean Bird. And then the one photo we have of it, these were all over here, that's the centerboard well. That was taken by Jerry Smith of Smith's Shipyard in 1981, and that was basically all that was left of it then. So these very old vessels and small vessels, there's not much left of them. It was renamed Zora and Anna in 1910 after it was rebuilt in Sharptown, Maryland. So we don't have much. This is another, you can always tell a Bodine photo. This was the Southern, the Ocean Tug Southern, and it's off the bow of the Ashland. We don't know for sure if it sank there. There is a cluster of debris, but there are also two vessels on the outside edge, and it could be one of those. And the other one is another tug called the Runner, which I couldn't get really good photos of. So these were both abandoned around 1941. So even though they were ocean-going tugs, they didn't play any role in Second World War. Another interesting vessel is this ferro cement one, the long, low one here. And this is my 2018 photo of it. It was written up online as the General Morgan Lewis. And the fellow who wrote it up ran one of those geocaching sites. So I contacted him, and I had to go through other people. It wasn't easy, and said, I'd like to talk to you. And he was all excited till he found out I didn't want to talk about geocaching. And I think he figured I was going to tell them not to do it because they had a cache on this vessel. It's tissue thin. Someone was going to get hurt, or they're going to damage my resource at the time. So I couldn't get him. He kept saying, "Oh, I'm really busy. I'll get back to you." Because all I wanted to know is where he got that information. What was his source? And if it was the Morgan Lewis, it was the sixth of 10 vessels of this type that were built in Wilmington at the Newport Shipping Corp. But interestingly, thank God the internet is so wonderful sometimes. I got an email from a fellow in Norway, Mr. Erlend Bonderud, who has been researching ferrocement vessels. And he said, "I don't believe it's the Morgan Lewis." He said, "I think it's the General George Gibson." And he sent me a deluge of evidence. So I believe he's absolutely right. So this was the fifth vessel of 10 that were built at that shipyard. And the best thing in the world is the Cape Fear Maritime Museum has that shipyard's documents, because it's just a parking lot now. And the one vessel they documented from laying the keel to launch was the George Gibson. So it's this vessel. So very, very cool to have that kind of a resource. After the war, they were all completed, in 1919, 1920, 21. So they never really served for World War One. They were troop transports on the East Coast for a while. The government offered them up for surplus sale. A few were sold off as restaurants, but none of them really sold well, and they all ended up sort of being abandoned. So that's sort of that little cluster. There's a better shot of it. And we'll move up to the top here, to the top of Hawkins Point, because these are more of that emergency fleet vessels collection. If you Google this and go in closely, you'll see 14 vessels from that arrow on the left to the arrow on the right. And there was an article in the Baltimore Sun that confirmed this, December 14th, 1929. And when the Sun sold off all its photos, there is a photo, but it's been copied so many times it's black. So I said, "Could you please, could I buy that photo?" And they said, "We never kept the photos from the Sunday supplements." And I call periodically to see if someone hasn't found something, but they said the photo's lost. So that's kind of sad. But if you go in and Google it, you'll see all these vessels. Some of them are in amazing shape. If you look closely, there's still deck hatches. This one, unfortunately, got dredged through in 94 without permission. And the point of these were they were brought in by Davison Chemical. They were going to make this barrier and backfill it to add another 50 acres to their property. And they were going to build housing for their staff on it. So you're back in the company town. You'll notice it's never been done. Look at the year. The Great Depression started in October. So they had the vessels up there, but nothing ever happened. I contacted them and said, I'd like to speak to your historian, your archivist. You must have the records from when this happened. And they were all like, no, we have nothing. They were very polite, but I think they were afraid that I was calling from the government and I might want money for them to move this or Superfund site it or remediate. Frankly, we didn't want them to move it. We don't want them touched. As I said, there were no environmental safeguards till the 1970s. We really don't want to disturb the bottom, but I can't believe they have no data, but they were very polite, but they said they had nothing. And so I couldn't coerce them into giving me any more data or any better photos. I thought they must have historic photos of these being brought in. But if you can play with it on Google, try and darken it or lighten it to get better images. Up in the upper right of the slide, if you look closely and move up there, you'll see that there's a little bit of the litter mentality happening here. If someone else has dumped something, it's okay for me to dump something. There's at least 3 more wrecks there, and probably a lot more if I could get in and have a better look at them. And this happened at Mallows Bay as well. We have all kinds of vessels in there that aren't really part of the fleet, but no one will know, and in some of these bays, it was sort of what watermen did it was their supply shop. You'd put your old vessels up the creek to die, but if you needed some, you'd go back and cannibalize them for parts if you needed. So unfortunately, nothing happened with those. Now, you saw that white, and I'll show it to you again, the white barge floating in the background, and there's a reason for that. We're going to look at this District of Columbia steamship is there. And here it is when it's not in such great shape, but there were 3 ships of the Old Bay line that ran right up until the end, pretty much. And this was actually the District of Columbus was the newest one. It was District of Columbia, sorry. The old Bay line closed in 1962 and they sold them off. But they had, this is the District of, the city, District of Columbia at the Pratt Street Pier. Here's the city of Richmond. City of Richmond was the second oldest vessel. It was 1913, and it made its last trip December 30th, 1959. But they held it in reserve as a spare vessel, and it ran between Richmond and Baltimore, so all the way up and down the rivers, and mainly, literally just bay traffic. And it was sold when the old Bay line shut down in 62. It was sold in 1963, was being towed to the Virgin Islands to be a restaurant when it sank all very suddenly and unexpectedly off South Carolina. The other vessel was the city of Norfolk. It was the oldest, built in 1911, and it was the one that ran right to the end. If you're of a certain vintage or you have friends who are, its last run was April the 13th, happened to be a Friday, 1962, and from Norfolk to Baltimore. And it was later sold for scrap and struck by lightning as it was being towed to New Jersey, caught fire. They got the fire out and it still got scrapped in New Jersey, but it was the oldest of the fleet. And it's one of those ones, you can tell the old ones. Here's a Bodine photo of the interior, absolutely gorgeous. And there it is at Pratt Street and in dock. So actually, the District of Columbia, here it is in its heyday, was the youngest of the bunch. And it was built in 1924 in Wilmington, North Carolina, but it had been idle since 1957 and was serving just as backup to the two older vessels, strangely enough. So when the company went under, when it shut down, it was sold to Massachusetts, and it ran as a ferry between Boston and Provincetown for the rest of 62 and 63, purchased and brought back to the Bay, renamed the Chesapeake, and was going to be refurbished as a restaurant hotel. But they found that the Coast Guard standards made the cost prohibitive, and it just sat there until it burned in 1969. Sorry, looking at it in its prime. And notice it's not as glorious on the interior as the older vessels were. Things were economizing, but there it is, 1969, caught fire. There's some people say it was a suspicious fire because they couldn't do anything else with it. Others say, hey, it's an old, dry, wooden, oil-impregnated boat, and they're going to catch fire, and they do. But it burned in 69, was towed and scrapped in Curtis Bay in 1970. Now, curiously, this is, if you look in the background, those are the World War I vessels that are making up the bulkhead at the top of Hawkins Point. So was it actually scrapped there intentionally? Did a line break? It just seems an odd place to dump it right there, as opposed to towing it around into Curtis Creek with everything else. But it did get dumped there. That's where it ended up. And then in the early 1990s, I think it was like 94 or 5, someone had the brilliant idea that they should level it off, take off this superstructure because it's really ugly. Well, now you've made a hazard to navigation, and they've had to moor a barge over it ever since to keep people from hitting it. So very, very odd situation there. I find it most curious. Now we'll drop down to the last cluster of vessels down here by the old railroad bridge. And we'll look at Bob's list here. He only lists 3, even though he shows 4 vessels. And there are, in fact, back up. There are, in fact, more than 4. The Conemaugh, the Emma Giles, and the Portland are the ones he lists. The Portland, I will show you an aerial photo of what I think it is, but there was a huge cluster of barges here. They were doing some scrapping, and the 2 round sections you see on the left of this image are the forms for the Fort McHenry Tunnel. And these vessels were in here to help do some of the scrapping. But when Bob took this picture in, I think it was 82, the vessels a lot of them were taken out after that because they wanted to get to some of these vessels. So I took an aerial today. This is actually from Google this afternoon. And this vessel is, I believe, the Portland. So it's one of the emergency fleet vessels that belonged to the Davison Chemical. It was the one that was built as Hull 303 at Quantico, renamed the Abra, and the Davison renamed it the Portland. And it was left here when they again found they weren't cost effective. One of these is a vessel that started out as an iron hull known as the Laurenti, and I'll talk about it in a second, later the Conemaugh. This one might be the Emma Giles. I thought it was over here, but I'm looking at some of the photos. This might be what's left of the Emma Giles. This is a barge, and I have no idea. Maybe this is the Emma Giles, but there's an extra vessel here, and I've not been over there to have a good look at what they might be. So it's still a bit of a mystery. If we do our field trip, we can go and have a look and see what there is to see. This vessel is the only metal one in the lot. It was built in Liverpool as the Laurenti in 1879, had a reputation as a crack square sailing vessel, 260 feet long, was in a collision in 1885, was rebuilt 2 years later as a four-masted schooner and named the Atlas. In 1902, it was named the Conemaugh and went to Texas, and it carried oil on the Texas coast until the Depression. Then it ended up in Baltimore as an oil storage hulk at Fairfield. You probably know where that is. And it held oil from other vessels that were being scrapped. Outside of World War II, it went where else? Locust Point, and sat there. It was purchased in 51 by a scrap metal dealer. And luckily, he made his money back because he pumped all the oil out that was in it, still holding it, and sold it. So he did well, and then he took to scrapping it. And so what you're seeing in the right-hand side was what Bob took in the 80s when it was finished scrapping it and still sitting there as the Conemaugh. And it was brought up from Locust Point and left where it is at present. The Emma Giles, for who wanted to hear about it, and everybody loves the Emma Giles, was built in Baltimore at Woodall's Yard. So again, down by General Ship and at the end of Woodall Street. Built in 1887, last carried passengers around 1936, and was purchased in 1937 and made into the biggest cigarette boat going. No, actually, it was for hauling lumber. They moved the cabin to the aft, and it carried lumber from North Carolina to Baltimore for 10 years. And the captain used to brag about its capacity and how he had this great, huge vessel now. It was left over near I'm trying to think of it as Quarantine Point by Fort McHenry. That's not the proper name for it, but it was left over there initially. And then it was made a bulkhead over at Locust Point for a while. Then it was taken down to Curtis Creek, and it was burned because it was a composite vessel. They burned the wood away to get the metal that was in it. So this is what's left, and that's why it looks awfully short. Maybe there's more of it than I think, and I was trying to peg what was in the background. This looks barge-like to me, so it's really hard trying to use a photo from the 30s to figure it out, quite what happened. Interestingly, this is in 1951 when it was burned. Sorry, not 30s. 30s when it operated as a lumber tug. 1951, it was burned for the metal. And sadly, the girl who christened it back in the 19th century, Emma Giles, was the daughter of one of the company owners. She was now Emma Giles Parker. She died the same day they burned it in 1951. She was 81 years old at the time. So interesting. And the one thing they had that I would love to find, but sadly I don't think it exists, on the wheel cover in the center of the hub, there is this fabulous carving, and it's a little worse for wear here, but it's a bee skep, and yes, I am a beekeeper, and it used to say in the background, busy as a bee, so it was at the bottom, Emma Giles, busy as a bee, and that was her slogan. And I called Pete Lesher at Chesapeake Bay Maritime Museum because Pete knows everything. And I said, Pete, is there any chance you guys got this in your collection somewhere? And if not, have you heard what happened to it? I would kill to refurbish this and have it, or have it in one of our collections. And he said, I think it burned. So a very sad end to that, but I just think that's such a gorgeous piece. And when it's all trim and in great full color, it'd be just beautiful. One of the last parts I'll mention of this, in 2017, there was a big fire down there, and this is the Portland burning. We know a great deal about the Portland because I mentioned Donald Chomet wrote this book, Ghost Fleet of Mallows Bay. He interviewed a fellow who was just over 100 years old who had helped build this. He was like 17, lived in Charles County. His name was Garnet Arnold. And he used to take his little boat across the Potomac to work in the shipyard at Quantico. But he very quickly learned that running liquor to the guys who worked in the shipyard at Quantico was much more fiscally gainful than working in the shipyard. But he could remember every detail. And when they went down to look at the vessel, they could match everything up that he talked about. Now, this fire, there was all kinds of sort of news stories that, well, it was it was lightning, it was arson, it was, drug dealers camping, it was vagrants staying on it. We don't really know. And I tried to get the story from the fire marshal and I didn't get anywhere. And I told this story, I think I was speaking at Tillman, over at Tillman Island, but two of the guys who either were attending virtually or were present were firemen who had attended this. And they sent me their own photos and their own video, which was very nice. It didn't show a lot more than was here. And they said, we'll try and find out for you. But I never heard another thing. So whatever happened, maybe they were told not to, maybe they couldn't find anything. But it was that was sort of the last thing we have for activities down in this area, but at least finding the one that seared, it made it easier to identify the Portland on here too. So I will end this here. I know it's been a bit of a whirlwind, but I hope it sort of whet your appetites to maybe want to do a field trip. If not, maybe you want to buy the books I mentioned and do your own little trip the next time you're down there. And Hillary has my slideshow. I'm not very proprietary. If you want to look at those again or borrow it or something, or if you want to email me for information, or you want to come out, we'll do a little, drive around and see what we can learn. Maybe we can figure out what the other vessels over by, maybe we can figure out which one's the Emma Giles, but identify some of the other ships, see what we can get close to. If we can find out what the current, the tug that people mentioned, that is went down recently or that is hit something, hit an obstruction. I'd be very curious to know where it's sitting in the water to try and figure out maybe what it hit. There is an awful lot of debris in that area. It's not an area that lends itself to diving either because, of course, the sewage treatment plant is there and every now and then you have a problem with overflow. Plus, it's a lot of industry in the area. I think it'd be almost a hazmat suit dive. You wear the old ones and wear your old suits and then toss them when you're done. That's what I would do. That's what I've done before when diving off of the Museum of Industry. I threw the suit out after I came out of the water. So I'll leave that there and maybe I can put my camera back on now. But I'm happy to answer questions if I can. If you don't think of anything now, you're welcome to shoot me notes later. And as talk to Hillary if you're excited about a field trip. It would be fun to paddle it, but we're being as you're all captains, I'm sure somebody can dredge up a vessel that we're all on. It's hard when I'm yelling from one kayak and everybody in the last kayak's going, what? So if we're all together, it would be cool. So.
Well, you've predicted some of our questions here, and I think Bob was the first one up with questions about those books you were talking about. Bob, do you want to go ahead and ask those, or would you like me to read your question?
Read them, Hillary. Just wanted to get the titles and authors' names, please.
Okay. There are, and this one I won't have the publisher because I just moved and I'm still unpacking, but we'll tell you Robert Burgess is the earliest author who collected most of these photos. And he had several books. One is called Chesapeake Bay Sailing Craft, 1975. Chesapeake Circle, I think that was it says volume 1, but it's a lie, 1965. And one this was Chesapeake Bay. And I think it came out in 63, but the fourth printing was 86. So you might find that this was Chesapeake Bay, also Robert Burgess. So there's those three vessels. And then Robert Keith, his was, just let me find the front page because I had to look it up myself today to make sure I was getting it correctly. It was, I'm throwing things all over the place. I think it was Baltimore Harbor, a picture history, not pictorial, a picture history. There's been a couple of printings of that as well. There's no real difference. I thought one of them, it had a big banner on it and it said new information. And I went page by page and I didn't find anything new in it. So anything you get from that, those are the main ones. And then Donald Chomette, Shomette, Donald Chomette. He's a very prolific maritime author in Chesapeake. And it was Ghost Fleet of Mallows Bay. it has a subtitle of "And Other Tales of the Lost Chesapeake." But if you look up Ghost Fleet of Mallows Bay, you'll find it. And that came out in 1996. And that's mostly about the emergency fleet, and it's all about Mallows per se. But as somebody asked, I think it was Lou asked me and I only answered him. I could have put it out generically. He said, "Aren't there some in Texas?" And yes, there are. There's another 30 plus vessels in the Sabine and Natchez rivers in Texas. Some of these, I think it's like 39, but some of them are ferro cement, some are metal hull. Most of the metal hull vessels were built on the Great Lakes. The only ones in Maryland that relate to the emergency fleet are wooden. So there are some in Texas. There's another half dozen in the James River. There's 2 in Hampton Roads. And that's all we found so far. But like I said, some of these were sold out of the country, some were sold up to New York, but none of them lasted very long in the private sector. As I was saying, the faults are they're so big that for short coastal trade, you can't fill them with enough to make it worthwhile. And you certainly can't take perishables because they're too slow and while you're waiting to fill them. They're not good enough for long distance trade. They don't handle rough seas. They don't have a lot of power. So they were, neither fish nor fowl was the big problem. And being built so hastily, there were a lot of issues with some of the vessels. Now, that being said, a lot of them ran the California coast. Some of them carried pineapples out back and forth from Hawaii. One at least made it to Greece after the war. One made it to France. Some of them did make it over. But in general, and a few of them, like the Iowa, that's what was the subject of a doctoral thesis. If you're really interested, there's the students that have been working on these. One of them, I can't think of his last name at the moment, but I can send it. He looked at a Sea Scout boat that ended up down there in the 80s. And it was an old aircraft rescue boat, and it became a Sea Scout boat. He did a master's on that. Allison Ropp, ROPP, and all of these are available from East Carolina University, did the Iowa as her doctoral thesis and was looking at microbiomes on them and trying to predict how long are these vessels going to last. And she did a masterful job. She did a 4-year study, not quite long enough, but the woman wanted to graduate. We had another master's study on the one metal hull vessel that's in Mallows Bay. And we had another master's on just the hull style. There are 9 or 10 different designs that were used to make these vessels. And most of them, I think 9 out of the 10 are represented in Mallows Bay. So he only looked at one design, but they did a good job on the history too. So any of the theses coming out of East Carolina University's nautical program are just absolutely excellent. And we've got it set up that they're going to keep coming up doing programs. So I'm trying to lure them up to do something up in Baltimore, but they're pretty fascinated with working out of Mallows, and it's easier for them to get there too. So we'll see. There's a lot of
Lou,
boats and a lot of
Lou Novak, did that answer your question about the Beaumont, Texas wooden freighters? Or did you want to follow
It
up?
sure did. I do appreciate it. Yes, thank you.
And Aaron,
Sorry we didn't get there, Lou.
Oh, and actually, there one is an island, and it's quite vegetated.
In Texas. Yeah, there's a student down there who started a doctoral thesis on these, but to my knowledge, he never finished his program, something family issues or because I was waiting to get his for all the vessels down there. But Dr. Amy Borgens, who was my counterpart in Texas, has a lot of information on these. So if you're going that way, she'd be happy to help you out to go visit them or whatever.
Oh,
Aaron?
I would appreciate that name.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
The name of that doctor.
Yep. Yeah, Amy Borgens, Borgens. She's the state underwater archaeologist for Texas. And I can send you her. I think I still got your email. I hope I do. If not, I'll get it to you through Hillary because they cut me off my government email, of course.
I sent you an email.
Oh, did you? Okay, I'll send you Amy's contact information, and you can maybe if you're down that way.
So Aaron Manor, if you can
Appreciate
hear us, can you tell us how many people are watching at the Beacon tonight? Maybe not. She was asking about, is it safe to kayak around the graveyard? Is it? safe there to go kayaking?
I would be wary. I had been trying to get down there several times and we had it set up 2 or 3 times and every time it fell through because I wanted to do that myself just to see how much debris is in the water. And I would be very cautious because of things like Stephen Chase. You saw how it stuck out of the water. And you can see the aerial photos down around, Walnut Cove. I would just be very wary. Apparently, a lot of people are kayaking out of there. They used to let us launch for free, and now they're charging $10 or something. And I don't blame them. I mean, it's privately owned. And I asked them the first time, and they said, no, it's fine. But I think a lot of people are asking now. So some people paddle up from Soller's Cove. And I was going to take the people from Anne Arundel County government up there, Parks and Rec, and it just deluged and they bailed on it. So I've not been there yet. Lou and I were talking about trying to do it and it never happened. So I've not done it myself. I would say it would be better to kayak. You'll really be able to get around behind and have a look, but I would be very wary and don't take a kayak you really love the bottom on, don't take an inflatable one, let's put it that way, or cardboard. Take something you don't mind scraping up the bottom a bit.
Hi, Aaron, I see you're on the road.
Yeah. But so I live on Marley Creek. And so every time I leave my house by boat, I pass their boat yard. So it is fascinating to go up. But yes, the goal is to get out of this creek, not stay in this creek. So yeah, I wanted to take my kayak down there. They do have a new boat launch down there that is run by Anne Arundel County. So maybe that's an option.
That's good to know.
There were
That's
three
good
of
to know.
us
I did
that,
talk.
down at
There are a couple more vessels that I didn't talk about that are farther up Marley and Furnace Creek, but they're being used as bulkheads. We haven't really identified. We think we maybe know what they're, but they're not as cool, so I didn't bother going that way. But you have some off some of those properties for sure.
Yeah, for sure.
All right. So if you've got a question, it's a free for all now. So let's see. You raise your hand or something. I've got a view of just about everybody here. So let me know if you've got a question. We can fit you in
Now,
now.
if you wake up at 3 a.m. with a burning question, email me. Half the time I am awake, but if I'm not, I will get back to you. If I have to look something up, it may be when I unpack some more books, but we'll see.
Chris Yearwood had a question. His hand was up.
Go ahead and unmute.
Oh, thank you. It wasn't really a question. I'm a retired docking pilot, and I used to spin ships around when we departed Bitamar, and I would often wonder about those old hulks sitting over there in Walnut Cove. So I appreciate the knowledge.
It's very cool. And the gentleman told me at one of my talks, he said, "Oh yeah, I was kayaking and I thought he said it was over near the Portland, that southernmost knot of ships." And he said, "Yeah, and there were letters on the back." And he gave me like 2, 3 letters, and none of them matched any of the names I know. So it'd be interesting if we do a field trip, we should try and see if there's anything. He may have misread them, but I said, because we know the names of those ones. There are 2 or 3 others, as I said, like the Boxborough and 2 others that all it says in the records are abandoned in Baltimore, but it doesn't say where. So it'd be, or maybe he found a different one, but they were letters that I couldn't place. So a little mystery, something to look for if we do a field trip. I'm glad it was helpful to you.
We are thinking about a field trip there somewhere in June, in the 13th to 16th date range there. If you could just type into the chat that you'd be interested, that'll help us gauge the level of interest and how many or how big a boat to get and how many times to go out there.
Yeah, we picked around that date because the 15th is a new moon, and with the new moon, we're going to get lower tides, so we'll be able to see more, both in the way of debris and in wrecks. So and I couldn't, the new moon or the full moons, the low tides were all like 3 in the morning, so that wasn't really productive. So the new moon, I think the lowest tides are in the afternoon, but it's close enough that if we went morning, afternoon, or both, if I'm down in the area, I'm at your disposal. So. Just let me know what works for you.
So that would be our goal then would be the 15th. And I'm seeing a fair amount of interest here. Yeah, we've all been looking at these for a long time and wondering, gee, what's going on down there? So your presentation today has been very, very useful. Do we have any other questions? Anyone want to bring something up? Cheryl is applauding. Yay. And there's some hand clapping over there from Priscilla too. And
Can
let's
we-
see. Doug missed the first 30 minutes. He'll watch for the recording. Remember, these are always recorded, and so they will be out on our YouTube channel, so don't miss those. I am going to share that we have just a quick reminder of the next thing that we're going to be doing here. If not the tour, we will have our Monday, June 22nd. We'll be at the Elks Lodge and looking at safety there. So later in October, we have we'll be back in the Elks Lodge. But can we get your email address, Susan? Can
Sure,
you
I'll
just
put it in the chat. I'll just stick it in the chat.
Thank you.
stick in the chat, Susan? Okay, so I could stop the share then. And that's about it. All right, there's your email address. Everybody can catch that. You've got special questions. She's going to help you there.
Sure.
So the one thing we wanted to do here at the end is we'd like all the women to stay on, and I'll do a screen share here.
And we thank the men for attending.
Thanks for being here.
Thanks for supporting International Day of Women in Maritime.